So today we're talking about the question, and this is a tricky one. We hear about where technology is at the moment and how we're blasting people up into space. I mean, we have been doing that for a while, but now it's becoming a bit privatized and rich people are going up in space, and we hear about modern medicine, all these incredible things. So is religion today still relevant?
I think this is a really interesting question. Is religion relevant in the modern world? And I think a lot of people have this question. Is religion really useful anymore? Hasn't a scientific way of approaching things now replaced religion? Hasn't it taken the place that was formerly occupied by religious beliefs and priests and authorities like that? Do we actually even need to consider religious, spiritual beliefs anymore? Now we're more educated and more aware of things. But since religion and faith still powerfully shape the beliefs and cultures of the world, we just have to look at some of the very mistaken justifications for what's going on in Russia and Ukraine at the moment. If we want to understand and learn about each other and learn about what's happening in the world and around us, we have to recognize that religion is at least relevant sociologically to what motivates people, what shapes them. But something can also be relevant in a different kind of way, in a more personal way, to you and to me, when it matters to you, when it matters to something you're doing right now, when it matters to a concern you have right now, and when it's true, when it affects your life and when it's necessary for you. I'm going to make the point this morning that the cross of Jesus Christ is a highly relevant thing to our modern lives, to our 21st century lives. So the cross of Jesus is the central event in the central life of the central character of Christianity. In fact, what actually dominated Jesus's mind was not the living, but the giving of his literal life. There simply is no Christianity without the cross. The cross is the central thesis, the central idea, the central action, the central moment of Christianity. Does this event engage in any clear way with our 21st century lives? Maybe today you hope for friendship, for closeness, for somebody to talk to, or for full-on love and marriage or romance, or just a gang, a squad to hang out with and to do things with. Maybe you hope for an opportunity to move into a field, to get into a course, to go to a new school, or to pass some exams or tests, maybe just to get your driving license. Maybe you just want to be valued where you are. You want to know that you have a sense of purpose, you have a sense of meaning to what you're doing, and that somebody sees you and is aware of you. Maybe you want to be the best football player or the toughest competitor. Maybe you want to achieve credibility, or you want to be seen, respected for what you can do or who you are. I think now it's fair to say that many of us have hopes, just reflecting on these sorts of questions. But equally, many of us find that anxiety and mental health challenges can be part of our battle. Levels of anxiety now are at the highest level that we've ever seen, despite the longest period in recent history, the longest period of peacetime. Now, this is except for the last 2 weeks, 3 weeks. Many people are still reporting feeling apprehensive and quite fearful about the future. Many different groups of people. Part of this might be because we're more connected to global concerns through our devices, our smartphones, and the continuous cycle of humanitarian crises, economic crashes, moral scandals, terrorism, extremism, wars, instability, pandemics, and concerns about the future all flood into our lives as soon as our eyes flick open, because our phone is often the first thing that we engage with and the last thing that we look at. Every single generation has been touched by the difficulty of living life when you struggle and when you hope for things to get better. But hope is always held alongside what we fear. And if you hope, if what you fear is stronger than what you hope for, then it's very, very difficult to live in hope. Fear often crushes and squashes our hope if what we fear is actually stronger. There's a philosopher called Peter Kreeft, and he says the deepest hope of the human heart is heaven. I was wondering why he said this. And I think it's because it's the only world that we tend to imagine that doesn't include fear and doesn't include death and suffering and pain. Maybe the deepest hope of the human heart is heaven. A massive consensus of 21st century psychologists and sociologists, people like Ernest Becker, have identified death actually as a really big fear for human beings. How is this cross relevant to this? Well, Christ confronts the fear, he confronts the reality of death with this cross. Because when Christ comes back from the dead, after being on the cross and dying on the cross, if that's true, and there's really good reasons to think it really is true for a thinking, reflecting person, this is actually the most hopeful news that you'll ever hear in your entire life. The cross actually shows us who stands behind everything and what this being thinks of us. What does the cross say? The cross says, I'm wanted, you're wanted. The cross says that we're known and we're loved. The cross says that God is real and he's involved. The cross says that a real loving God is working through and standing with us in the pain of suffering and conflict. The wrongs are seen. There is justice. There is mercy. So how does the cross answer the big questions of life? What may we hope for? The cross deals with our darkest fear that we will experience. All those fears and loss of hope that encroaches in on us. Fear of death. God offers us a rescuing relationship that overcomes death. It also speaks to our need in this world to experience moral renewal and transformation. How many different situations would be changed if we could see transformation and change in the human heart and human nature? How much of our news is impacted by the mixed upness, the capacity of human beings to mess things up? How much of our nature impacts the terrible news that we read in the world? Actually, the cross speaks to this, because the cross opens up a way for us to experience deep heart, personal transformation, because God comes into our lives and into our situation, makes this possible through the cross and says, I'm with you, I'm going to change you, I can transform you, I can take you on a journey through friendship with me that will change everything. And the cross also speaks for our desire to know things, to know the truth, to know answers. We were asking all these questions on Wednesday mornings, and that's a desire for us to know. This is a contemporary desire for us to know. This is not like 2,000 years ago. We want to know answers to all sorts of questions. It is relevant because the cross answers our need to know who is there, what does he think of us, what's the situation we're in, what can we hope for in the future, what's our identity, what's our purpose, why do we exist? The cross declares that God is there, and it declares his truth to us. So the cross answers big questions like, what can I hope for? What should I do? How should I act? The need for moral transformation in the world, the need to have our personalities change sometimes. And also, what can I know? How can we know? The cross speaks to our worst fears. It speaks to and deals with our worst parts. It tells us the truth about ourselves. And the cross and the resurrection don't just tell us about the rescue and its relevance. It also tells us about the rescuer. It declares the nature of a God who is generous, who overflows with mercy, and who overflows with love for us. In our contemporary world, think about this. It shows us what reconciliation looks like in the midst of conflict. It's God breaking into our warring world and him providing a way for healing to happen. It gives us the greatest hope possible. He promises to gently show us how we can live in freedom. And he tells us that he loves us and that he's with us.
I just want to pick up on something that you mentioned about how there's this real fear of death in the
Yeah.
human race.
Yeah.
And I have heard people argue the fact, well, actually, religion is just a crutch. It's something to prop you up because the human mind cannot actually handle the fact that, you know, you switch off and you're basically worm food, as some people put it. So what would you say about that? That basically, you know, religion and having this belief in God, we just need to basically get over the fact that we are just here, we've evolved, we've grown, we die, and that's it. We don't need religion.
Well, there are a number of different interesting ways to comment on that and to talk about that. I think that it's absolutely right that there's a shape in us, there's a gap in us where we long for relationship with God. And many people have pointed out, some psychologists have tried to point out, like Sigmund Freud, that we project God onto the world, but actually there's no real God. We're projecting it from our psychology. It's a projection out of us. Equally, there's a study that's been done of famous atheists looking at their relationship with their fathers, their earthly human fathers. And there has been a study that's established that there is a relationship between very strong public atheism and quite difficult relationships with fathers. So it could be argued on the other side of this that if the Christian is trying to project God out of their psychological need, well, maybe the atheist is trying to sometimes kill God out of psychological need or trying to cope with all of that. I actually think that shows us that psychological observations can't move us on their own terribly far. The problem also is that there's a logical fallacy here, which is called the genetic fallacy. There you are, Gareth. There's a new thing for you to throw around today. The genetic fallacy has nothing to do with genetics or DNA. It just basically means when you confuse the truth of something with the psychological or emotional reasons that somebody might choose to believe it. So let's say that Sigmund Freud was right, that all of the disciples came to believe in the resurrection of Jesus because they were projecting a father figure, they were projecting an archetype, they were projecting a hope onto the world that wasn't really there. Let's say that that's true. For the sake of just argument briefly, let's say that's true. I don't think that makes sense with the data we have about what they said and did, but let's just say that's true for a moment. So they had psychological reasons for believing it. How does that affect whether or not Jesus actually lived, actually died on the cross, and actually rose from the dead? It doesn't touch it. That event could still have happened independently from the psychological reasons or emotional reasons somebody might have for believing it. So there's that side of it too. We've got to be careful not to think that we've dealt with Jesus because we've explained some people's psychological reasons for belief. I do think we will meet people in life and we come across people who have more persuasive reasons for what they believe, and then we'll meet people who have perhaps less persuasive reasons to us. I think the responsibility is on each of us to say, let me look into it, let me find out, and not just find a kind of an easy reason to chuck it away, but let me actually dig into this and look for myself. Let me read a gospel, let me read Mark's gospel or Luke's gospel, let me look at the film The Case for Christ that's on Netflix or Amazon Prime. Let me actually read the book, The Case for Christ, The Case for Faith. Let me see what I think for myself when I've really considered some evidence here.
And I heard a phrase, you'll probably know exactly who it was that coined this, that atheists accuse Christians of being afraid of the darkness, the fact that everything switches off. Well, actually, could it be that atheists are afraid of the light?
Yeah, I know. I know the person who said that. I think it's Richard Dawkins, and I think John Lennox offered the response that you just mentioned as well. Could it be that atheists are afraid of the light? Do you know what? I think these sort of I want to take our discussions of beliefs away from this sort of battlefield of atheists and Christians. We've all, as human beings, got to work out what we think about things. I have times where I have really big questions in my life, and I have times where there are ideas that I doubt or things that I'm not sure about. Now, I don't think my basic trust in Christ is is changing day to day. That stays consistent. But I might change what I think about, well, how God created the world, or the, different sort of points around it. And I think it's also human for everybody to admit that we all change some of our beliefs, and we ought to be changing some of our beliefs based on new information. So I'm up for the conversation, and I'd like to move away from the whole kind of hand grenade battle. Let me take down my drawbridge, lob a hand grenade out at the other side, and let's actually say we're all people. We've got to make sense of this amazing existence that we've got. We've all got big questions like, what can I hope for? What should I do? Why am I here? What's my identity? And everybody has to answer those questions. It doesn't matter whether you're religious or non. We've got to figure it out. I think the reflective life, where we're asking questions and listening to answers, I think that is a stimulating and a thrilling way to experience life.
And that's why we have you on, Tom. We absolutely love it. Next week, you're going to be bringing us, now this is a very tricky one. How can anyone believe in a good God if there's so much suffering in the world? And I think we did touch upon this slightly last week, but we're going to go into it in full next week on the show. Thank you very much, Tom. And you take care, won't you?
Thanks. Bye.